The most dangerous person in any emotional environment is not the one who feels nothing. It is the one who feels everything, but no longer reacts the way you expect. Because once an empath heals, something fundamental breaks in the system of control, and no one can predict their emotional response anymore. Have you ever noticed how some people suddenly change, not by becoming colder, but by becoming calm in a way that makes others uncomfortable? Today we are talking about why healed empaths seem dangerous to people who once had emotional access to them, and why that shift changes every relationship around them. There is a version of you that people start calling cold, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally stopped bleeding for everyone. And the moment that shift happens, something inside you changes in a way others can immediately feel, even if they cannot explain it. You become dangerous in a quiet way. Not loud, not aggressive, not dramatic, just no longer available for emotional manipulation. And that changes everything around you because most people have never met someone who can feel deeply, understand deeply, and still walk away when something is not right for them anymore. That combination is rare, and that rarity is what makes people uncomfortable, even if they don't admit it. Most people misunderstand themselves in this process. They look back at their past and remember how much they felt, how deeply they cared, how easily they got affected by others' moods and emotions. Then they jump to a harsh conclusion about themselves. They assume they were weak, but that conclusion is not correct. Weakness is not the presence of emotion. Weakness is the inability to respond to life at all. What you had was not weakness. It was lack of structure. You were not broken. You were unprotected, emotionally open, without any filter or boundary system in place to regulate what enters and what stays. When a person is open without protection, they do not just experience life, they absorb it completely. You don't just see people when you enter a room, you feel them instantly. Tension is not something you observe from a distance, it becomes something you carry in your body. Frustration in the room does not stay outside of you, it settles inside you. Even silence is not neutral anymore, it feels heavy, like it has weight. Over time, your nervous system adjusts to this constant exposure. It becomes hyper-aware, always scanning, always reading, always trying to predict what is going to happen next before it happens. This is not because something is wrong with you. It is because your brain learned a survival pattern. It believed that if I can understand everything happening around me, I can stay safe. So you started over-listening, over-explaining, over-giving, and over-adjusting. You tried to smooth every conflict, reduce every tension, and carry emotional weight that was never actually yours to carry in the first place. It felt like responsibility, but in reality, it was emotional overextension. And this is where things slowly start to shift without you noticing it. The more you operate this way, the more people unconsciously begin to expect it from you. Not because they are necessarily bad, but because human behavior adapts to patterns. If you are always understanding, they expect understanding. If you are always forgiving, they expect forgiveness. If you are always available, they assume you will always remain available. And over time, you become predictable in a way that works against you. On the surface, it still looks like kindness. It still looks like patience and emotional maturity. But internally, something else is happening that most people never see. You are not replenishing yourself. You are slowly draining. Not in a dramatic collapse, but in a quiet depletion, like a battery that never fully recharges because it is always in use. You start to feel tired in a different way, not just tired of people, but tired of being the version of yourself that everyone has come to expect from you. This is where the deeper exhaustion begins. You are not exhausted because you feel too much. You are exhausted because you never stop carrying what was never meant to be carried by you. And over time, that becomes your normal state without you even realizing it. You keep functioning, you keep showing up, but something inside you starts asking for space, for separation, for boundaries that did not exist before. Healing does not begin when life suddenly feels better. It begins when you start noticing your own patterns in real time. You catch yourself about to over-explain something that does not need explanation. And for the first time, you stop mid-sentence. You feel the urge to fix someone else's emotional state, and instead of acting on it, you pause. You notice that familiar instinct to take responsibility for other people's reactions, and you do not follow it automatically anymore. That moment is important, even if it feels small and uncomfortable. That is not weakness. That is control starting to form where there was once only reaction. And at first, it feels strange because your identity has been built around being the understanding one, the emotionally available one, the person who always holds things together. So when you stop doing that automatically, it feels like you are losing a part of yourself. But you are not losing anything real. You are gaining separation. A separation between what belongs to you and what never did. This is where real psychological strength begins to take shape. Strength is not about shutting off your emotions or becoming numb. It is about being able to feel deeply without being controlled by what you feel. It is the ability to recognize this emotion is present, but it does not define my actions. This responsibility feels real, but it is not mine to carry. This urge to fix someone is strong, but it is not required of me. That awareness creates space inside you, and in that space, something new becomes possible. You gain choice. Before, your empathy was automatic, almost reflexive. Now it becomes intentional. You decide when to engage and when to step back. You decide what deserves your emotional energy and what does not. You are no longer pulled by every emotional current around you without resistance. And this is the part that changes everything internally. When you stop absorbing everything, your system stabilizes. Your reactions become less reactive. Your mind becomes clearer. Your emotional state becomes less chaotic. Not because life becomes easier, but because you are no longer carrying every external emotion inside your internal world. You are no longer drowning in everything you perceive. So no, you were never truly weak. You were unprotected. You had sensitivity without structure, awareness without boundaries, empathy without control. And now, as you begin to build those missing structures, you do not lose your depth. You refine it. You do not stop feeling. You stop being overwhelmed by what you feel all the time. There is a pattern that most people never question because it feels like the right thing to do. You give more, you explain more, you tolerate more, you understand more. And on the surface, it looks like strength. It looks like emotional maturity. It even gets rewarded by others. People appreciate you, rely on you, and keep coming back to you. So naturally, you assume this must be the correct way to exist in relationships. But underneath that pattern, there is a belief operating quietly in the background. If I give enough, I will be safe. Safe from rejection, safe from conflict, safe from being left. This belief does not appear directly. It hides inside behavior. It shows up when you say yes, but internally mean no. It shows up when you explain yourself to people who are not even trying to understand you. It shows up when you tolerate discomfort just to keep peace that is not real peace at all. Over time, this creates a loop. The more you give, the more is expected from you. The more you tolerate, the more your limits are tested. The more you explain, the less effort others make to understand you. This is not real connection. This is conditioning. People begin to unconsciously learn that your boundaries are flexible, your energy is accessible, and your emotional capacity is always available, no matter what. And this is the part that is hard to accept at first. Overgiving does not create strong relationships. It creates imbalanced ones. Because real connection requires mutual presence. But when you overgive, you silently remove that balance. You become the one who holds everything together emotionally. You regulate, you fix, you stabilize. At first, it feels like control. Over time, it becomes exhaustion. Healing interrupts this system, but not in a dramatic way. It does not begin with a big decision or a sudden transformation. It begins in small moments of awareness. You notice how quickly you rush to help. You notice how uncomfortable silence feels, so you try to fill it. You notice how often you try to make things okay, even when it is not your responsibility. And instead of reacting instantly, you pause. And that pause is where everything starts to change. Because for the first time, you are not being driven purely by conditioning. You are observing it. The thoughtful. When you observe a pattern clearly enough, it slowly begins to lose its grip on you. It stops feeling like something that controls you and starts looking like something you can actually see from a distance. And in that space, your thinking begins to shift. You start asking questions you never asked before. Why do I feel responsible for this situation? What actually happens if I don't step in right now? Is this truly mine to carry, or did I just pick it up out of habit? These questions don't just give you answers. They create distance between you and your automatic behavior. And that distance is where real change begins to form, quietly but powerfully, without needing any dramatic moment. At first, this new awareness feels uncomfortable. You say no and immediately feel a wave of guilt. You stay quiet and feel like you are doing something wrong. You stop over-explaining yourself and suddenly wonder if people will misunderstand you or think badly of you. But that discomfort is not a warning sign that you are doing something bad. It is actually a sign that you are doing something new. Your nervous system is simply reacting to the loss of an old survival pattern, the pattern where safety was earned through overgiving, over-explaining, and over-accommodating everyone around you. Now you are slowly teaching it a different rule, that I can remain safe even when I do less. This learning does not happen instantly. It takes repetition, patience, and consistency. You start letting people sit with their own emotions instead of immediately stepping in to fix them. You allow silence to exist without rushing to fill it. You tolerate misunderstandings without immediately trying to correct every perception. And you accept something very important. Not everyone will be comfortable with your boundaries. Some people will resist them, not because your boundaries are wrong, but because they were benefiting from you not having any. And this is where clarity starts replacing confusion. You begin to clearly see the difference between people who value you as a person and people who only value what you provide. Once that distinction becomes visible, you cannot unsee it. It changes how you interpret every interaction. Your behavior begins to shift, not in an aggressive or emotional way, but in a steady and consistent direction. You stop giving energy where it is not respected. You stop chasing explanations from people who only create confusion. You stop trying to prove your worth through constant effort and emotional labor. Instead, your presence starts to speak for itself. You show up fully, but not endlessly. You care deeply, but not automatically. You give, but only where there is respect and mutuality. And this is where a deeper transformation begins to take place. Your empathy is no longer driven by fear or insecurity. It becomes a conscious choice. You are no longer giving just to avoid rejection or abandonment. You are giving because it aligns with your values and feels right in the moment. That shift changes everything inside you. When empathy is driven by compulsion, it drains your energy and leaves you feeling empty. But when empathy is guided by choice, it becomes sustainable. It no longer destroys you from within. It starts to support you. Your kindness becomes cleaner, more stable, and more grounded. There is no hidden resentment behind it, no silent exhaustion, no unspoken expectation that others must return what you give. There is only clarity in action. From that clarity, overgiving naturally begins to fade. Not because you stop caring about people, but because you finally understand something fundamental. You do not need to give more of yourself to deserve respect, love, or stability in relationships. And once that belief starts to dissolve, you stop offering yourself endlessly to people who were never holding you with the same level of care. There comes a point in your growth that confuses others around you. Not because you have become unrecognizable, but because you have stopped reacting in the ways they are used to. They notice that you are no longer responding instantly, no longer apologizing without thinking, no longer explaining every decision you make. Instead, you pause. And that pause is what creates uncertainty for them. Most people do not realize how strongly human behavior depends on patterns. We learn how others usually respond, and then we adjust our expectations and actions based on that predictability. If someone always agrees, we keep asking them. If someone always forgives, we keep pushing their limits. If someone always explains themselves, we stop making the effort to understand. It is not always intentional harm. It is just how the mind reduces uncertainty by relying on patterns. For a long time, you were part of a predictable pattern. You were emotionally available, understanding, and responsive in a consistent way. People learned how to get reactions from you. Emotional pressure worked. Silence worked. Guilt worked. Because your system was built around maintaining connection at almost any cost. But when healing begins, that pattern starts to break, and it does not break loudly. It breaks quietly through hesitation. You feel the urge to respond immediately, and for the first time, you do not. You feel the need to defend yourself, and instead of reacting, you stay grounded. You notice emotional pressure coming toward you, and instead of absorbing it, you observe it. That small gap between stimulus and response becomes extremely important. In psychology, that gap is where control exists. Before, your reactions were automatic. Now they begin to become intentional. And when people can no longer predict your responses, they start to lose influence over your emotional state. This is why this stage feels uncomfortable for both sides. You are no longer the consistent emotional role you used to play, and others are no longer able to rely on that automatic access to your energy. You are still kind, still understanding, still emotionally aware, but now there is discernment behind it. Discernment changes everything about how people experience you. You no longer respond to every message instantly. You do not engage in every emotional situation that is placed in front of you. You do not automatically validate behavior that crosses your boundaries just to keep things smooth. And for people who were used to your old pattern, this feels like distance. But in reality, it is precision. You are no longer spreading your emotional energy evenly across every situation. You are evaluating before you respond. You are choosing where to invest yourself and where to step back. And this is what makes manipulation less effective. Because manipulation depends on predictable emotional reactions. It depends on knowing exactly what button to press to get a response from you. But when you slow down your reactions, when you stop responding impulsively, those emotional buttons stop working the same way. Guilt does not control you as easily. Pressure does not move you as strongly. Silence does not affect you in the same way. You are still aware of these tactics, but you are no longer absorbing them into your identity. This is where your real power begins to shift, not into control over others, but into control over yourself. And at a deeper level, something even more important changes. Boundaries are not just about saying no. They're about removing the need to constantly explain your no. Because explanation is often where people try to reopen negotiation. You say no, then justify it. You justify it, then someone challenges it. You defend it, and suddenly the boundary becomes a debate. But when your boundaries are internally clear, you stop feeling the need to over-explain them. You speak less, not because you are hiding something, but because you are certain. And that certainty is felt more than it is heard. It shows in your tone, your timing, your silence, and your presence. You do not rush to fill space. You do not over-explain your choices. You do not chase emotional resolution. And this calm presence carries weight. People may not consciously understand it, but they feel it immediately. They feel that you are no longer easily pulled into emotional reactions or automatic agreement. And because of that, your relationships begin to reorganize themselves. Some people adapt to this new version of you. They meet you with more respect, more balance, and clearer communication. Others resist it. They test your limits, push your boundaries, and try to pull you back into your old emotional patterns. Not necessarily because they are bad people, but because they were comfortable with the version of you that required less effort from them. Now you require more balance, more respect, and more accountability. And not everyone is willing to meet that level of emotional responsibility. That is why unpredictability is often misunderstood. It gets labeled as inconsistency, when in reality, it is consistency with yourself. You are no longer adjusting your behavior to manage other people's reactions. You are aligning your behavior with your internal values. And when that alignment becomes strong, your responses naturally vary depending on the situation. Not every situation gets the same energy. Not every person gets the same access. Not every behavior receives the same emotional response. That is not confusion. That is clarity in action. So when people say you have changed, they are not wrong. You have changed in the sense that your reactions are no longer controlled by expectation. You pause before you respond. You observe before you engage. You choose instead of react. And in a world where most people are still driven by automatic emotional patterns, that shift is not weakness at all. It is a different kind of strength, one that is quiet, stable, and difficult to influence. This is where people begin to misunderstand you. They see the change in your behavior. You are calmer, more reserved, less emotionally reactive, and they mistake it for detachment or emotional coldness. But what they are actually witnessing is stability. You are no longer swinging between extremes. You are not overgiving in one moment and emotionally collapsing in the next. You are not fully invested one day and completely drained the next. Instead, you have found something in between, a steady ground. And that middle ground is where emotional wholeness begins to exist. Now, there is a deeper psychological layer underneath this transformation. Carl Jung described the concept of the shadow, which refers to the parts of ourselves we suppress because we believe they are unacceptable or wrong. For many highly empathetic people, those suppressed parts often include the ability to say no, to set limits, to prioritize themselves, and to walk away without guilt. Somewhere along the way, you learned that these traits were negative. You were made to believe that being firm meant being unkind, that being distant meant being selfish, that protecting yourself meant being difficult. This embodiment naturally reshapes your relationships. You stop connecting through emotional urgency or bonding through chaos, intensity, or shared instability. Instead, relationships become simpler, calmer, and more honest. You allow people to meet you where they are without forcing closeness, and without overextending yourself just to keep one-sided connections alive. Because of this shift, some relationships naturally fade, not because something is wrong with you, but because they were built on the version of you that overgave, overexplained, and overaccommodated. What replaces them is more balanced and stable. There is mutual respect, emotional steadiness, and healthier exchange. You are no longer the emotional regulator for everyone around you, or the person carrying every interaction. You engage where there is reciprocity and step back where there is imbalance. In the process, people may misread this change as distance or coldness, but in reality, it is regulation. You have not lost empathy or softness, you have structured them. You have learned to move through life without dissolving into it, and that is what makes this stage of growth feel so different, calm, grounded, and internally steady. In the end, this is not about becoming distant, cold, or disconnected. It is about becoming aware. You were never weak for feeling deeply. You were simply unprotected and operating without boundaries. And once you begin to see your patterns clearly, you stop living on automatic reactions and start choosing how you respond to life. True growth is not about shutting down your emotions, but learning how to feel without losing yourself in them. It is the shift from overgiving to understanding your own limits, from emotional exhaustion to emotional clarity. You stop carrying what was never yours, and you start respecting your own energy as much as you respect others. And from that place, something steady begins to form inside you. You become calmer, clearer, and more grounded. Not because the world changed, but because you stopped abandoning yourself in it. That is where real strength begins, in awareness, balance, and self-respect.